creative child. So how do we help our children? I'm going to give you 10 tips, and these are fairly simple, and they're based on my experience. Okay. First of all, learn to distinguish between a creative personality and disobedience. Okay. Think of the messy room one. The creative person whose room is a mess, it's not necessarily because they're rebelling. It's not necessarily because they're not wanting to listen to you or follow your authority. Part of that is just their personality. Now, as we go on, I'll explain ways to deal with that. But make sure that you distinguish because yelling and disciplining don't generally help if it's a creative person. I mean, it just, for example, I said I'd come back to the doodling thing because sometimes, again, if you're in class and your child is doodling while you're trying to teach and you find it distracting, you might say, stop that. You're not focusing, you're not listening, you're disobeying. Anybody know who did those? A very well-known person did those. Who said that? Ronald Reagan. During cabinet meetings. Okay? So here is arguably, at the time, the most powerful man in the world, dealing with issues of global consequence, and he's drawing cowboys, horses, football players, baby, well, I don't know if that's a baby or Zippy the Pinhead at the bottom, but just, faces and whatever. Was he detached? Well, some people probably would say he was. I don't think he was. A creative person often will stay focused by doodling, okay? If I am in a meeting and I don't draw, then my mind will go anywhere. For whatever reason, if there is a pen in my hand and I'm just drawing shapes or whatever, my mind is engaged, even if it looks like I'm totally unfocused. So learn to recognize some of those creative behaviors. To cultivate a creative atmosphere. Okay, creative children like to create. They like to do different things. Sadly, today, we've kind of moved away from creative atmosphere. So I've just got all sorts of little items there. That's one of the Legos that is out now. When I grew up and somebody got me Legos, it didn't look like that. It looked like that. And it was my job to figure out how to make something out of it. Now, it's not to say that the instruction and pre-done Legos are bad. It's interesting that in our culture we've come to a point where everything tends to be done for you. Encourage, try to supply that child with ways to express that creativity. And again, we'll talk more about that as we go on. But cultivate a creative atmosphere. Give your child permission to be different. Creative children march to the beat of a different drummer. And try as you might, they're not going to conform to, your expectations, and they're not necessarily going to be like their brother or sister. I'm the youngest of three. My brother was a football player. He was an athlete. And, you name the sport, he was involved in it. My sister was the cheerleader and, she, the super popular. I was the nerd that nobody liked. Of course, I went to public school. When I grew up, there was no homeschooling. I wish there had been. But I was different. I didn't fit into my brother's mold, didn't fit into my sister's mold. I didn't fit into anybody's mold. I remember when I was probably about 8 years old, my dad came up to me and he said, Jim, so-and-so, a friend of his, had given him $5 for me. And so my dad said, now, You can spend this any way you'd like, but what I'd really like is to get you a baseball glove. Well, I said, sure. Not because I wanted a baseball glove. Another characteristic of a creative child is often they won't really tell you what is on their mind or what they want. I said, sure. I didn't want a baseball glove. I didn't like baseball. I wasn't interested in sports. Still am not interested. I watch the Cowboys occasionally, but even that's discouraging nowadays. I'm from the Dallas area. But that just wasn't me. And the baseball glove got used 2 or 3 times, and that was about it. Give your child permission to be different. When I was probably 4 years old, my annual gift, starting at about that age, which would have been 1959, my annual Christmas gift was a record player, because I would wear one out every year. I listened to just about everything. In fact, when I don't know how old I was I hadn't learned to read yet, but my mother was sitting in the living room with a salesman for Childcraft Encyclopedia. And he was trying to convince her how important it would be to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on these encyclopedias, because I would learn so much. And I was there, and I had my record player and a stack of records. And she said, let me show you something. And she said, Jimmy, will you pick out such and such a record? I pulled it out. Couldn't read, but I knew exactly which record to give her. By the time I was 7 or 8, one of my favorite records was Maurice Evans reading from Julius Caesar. And it wasn't because my parents were trying to instill culture into me. I don't even know how I got that. But I loved listening to it. By the time I was 8 or 9 or 10, I could recite Mark Antony's speech by heart. I hadn't tried to memorize it. I just enjoyed listening to it. As I was growing up, my favorite musicians were Louis Armstrong, Glenn Miller, all sorts of different things, and I have very wide and eclectic tastes. But the point is, my parents gave me ultimately permission to be different. Creative children are going to march to a different drummer. They're going to be different. Go with that. Don't try to steer them into what their brother or sister or just what you think they should be doing. Learn. That's why we call this guiding the creative child. You're going to learn how to guide them, learn how to direct them. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the first step is give them permission to be different. Encourage your child to explore and develop his or her interests. Now, you've got to kind of become a student of your child to do this. You need to watch and see what seems to be the kinds of things that they are attracted to. For example, I mentioned I was very into music. Well, when I was about 13 years old, my parents said, would you like to learn how to play the guitar? And I had never thought about it. I'd never asked about it. I'd never even seen, well, I'm sure I'd seen a guitar somewhere before, but nobody else in my family played. My sister had taken piano lessons for a while, but we didn't have that piano anymore. And, it was really out of the blue. I just, would you like to learn to play the guitar? And I said, sure. And I really don't know why I said sure, because I'd never thought of it, but it just seemed like it was a good fit. So they bought me an El Cheapo guitar, and I started taking lessons because they were a student of me. So what you want to do with your creative child is watch and see what they're interested in, see what they're attracted to, see what areas of creativity that they seem to be drawn to, and then try to encourage them in that. And there may be times when you'll see something that they don't even perceive yet, but you'll see an interest there. You'll see an aptitude for something. And again, gently, don't force, but gently say, hey, would you like to try, such and such? And you might be surprised. They might enjoy doing something new. So encourage them to develop their interest. 5, watch out for creativity killers. There's a reason I have a computer there. We are increasingly a media and technology-dominated society. Now, that's not bad, okay? A lot of great things have come out of technology. I have a computer. I have an I don't have an iPhone. I can't afford that. But I've got a smartphone. I've got a Kindle. I love my Kindle. But have you ever noticed how hypnotic the computer and electronics can be? You know, you go out to dinner somewhere and you see a whole family at a table and they've all got their, Well, not only is technology a conversation killer at times, it very much can be a creativity killer, because the more time you spend just on technology, playing video games, surfing the internet, doing whatever, that much less time you are investing in actually creating and doing something. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm just saying be sure that doesn't become a dominant force. Creativity is often best done with your two hands, unless you're writing computer programs, or you can create artwork on the computer now. So there are ways to do it, but just watch out for the things in your household that might tend to shut down creativity. And this one is actually kind of a duplicate of the other one. Don't be afraid to suggest possible creative outlets, ones that they may not have thought of. You may have a musical child. You might want to suggest trying some art out. It seems a lot of times with a creative child that creativity will go across multiple levels. Again, I'm an artist. I'm a musician, or at least I'm a vocalist and a guitarist. About 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to teach myself how to play the piano. So, I play keyboards now. I wanted to write books. There was just something in me that wanted to do that. And so I started, and I took some courses in it. But, creative people will tend to not just focus on one area of creativity. Often it's going to be a broad spectrum. So give them a chance to explore different approaches, different things. Number 7, expose them to the arts. This is kind of a big one for me, because in the church and in Christianity in general, often the arts are kind of shifted to the back burner. Also in education, often the arts are shifted to the back burner, both in Christian and in secular education many times, because we just think, well, the arts aren't all that important. But the arts are, you speak to the heart through the arts. You also can influence the mind through the arts, and that's one of the reasons I recommend, if you haven't ever watched them, watch Francis Schaeffer's series, How Should We Then Live? It was done back in the 70s, so it is a bit dated, but what it will show you is how through the arts worldviews are communicated. And I say expose them to the arts because you want your kids to be able to relate to the arts, to understand what they're saying. They may not agree, or you may not agree with the message, but make sure that they're exposed to the arts. Also, your creative child, the more you expose them to the arts, the more opportunities you're going to have to kind of see what areas they might be interested in following and interested in exploring. Go to an art museum. Take them to a symphony concert. Take them to a Broadway show if you can afford it, or if there's a touring group. Let them see the arts. Let them, don't shut them off from the arts, because a creative child, that's going to begin to prompt them and direct them in ways that they can go, things that they can develop. Here's a really big one. Don't let them take shortcuts. Okay, so far I've been talking about positive things that you can do. This is one that you really, really want to watch. Creative people will tend to take shortcuts because they can. And I use myself as an example there. I got that little guitar when I was 13 years old, and I took 6 whole weeks of lessons because I was learning songs that I wasn't really interested in, and I didn't like having to learn all these scales, And I was just bored with it. So after 6 weeks, I quit. And back then, my favorite group was Peter, Paul, and Mary. Yes, I'm showing my age. But I had a whole stack of Peter, Paul, and Mary records. And I got the books. And I sat down and I would listen and actually learned how to imitate the finger-picking styles and taught myself how to play guitar by listening to Peter, Paul, and Mary and reading the chord books. That's all fine and good, except when you don't learn by the ropes. In other words, I talked earlier about learning to color outside the lines. Well, once you learn how to color outside the lines, you always have to remember that there are times you need to color inside the lines. And because I never took the time to really learn anything more than what I was able to teach myself, I kind of hit a brick wall in terms of what I can do on a guitar because I wasn't willing to go by the ropes and really learn how to do it. The art class, I See the Light sells some art DVDs, and in those 9 DVDs, we take you step by step through the process of learning how to draw. And I tell parents that are looking for art curriculum the same way. You can have a child who is extremely artistic, who can just sit down and draw without really having any instruction at all. They just have a knack for it. But if they don't learn the elements of art, if they don't learn composition, if they don't learn all of basically the rules, the theory that goes behind art, they're going to be limited too. When I decided I wanted to teach myself how to play the piano, the only way I could do it was by transferring what I knew from the guitar and figuring out how to create chords on the piano and play that way. I can't read music, but I can play just about anything you want, but give me a piece of music, I can't do it. So don't let them take shortcuts. Shortcuts, that's a creative child, a creative person very often can teach themselves how to do whatever they want to learn. But by taking those shortcuts, by not learning the way or step by step, not learning the principles, whatever it is they're trying to learn, they can limit themselves and their ability in the long run. I learned from that. So when I got interested in writing, I started actually studying writing. As a matter of fact, that's kind of an interesting one because as I'm a writer and an editor, and it's amazing when you see the kind of stuff that is submitted for publication by people that is almost stream of consciousness, incoherent, and you sit down and they expect you to publish what they're sending you, and it's like, did you ever take the time to learn your craft? And that's again when I got interested in writing. By then I'd figured out I do have to do things by the ropes. So I spent several years learning how to write fiction before I ever tried writing a novel. And I lost count of the number of books on fiction writing. I took a fiction writing course, took creative writing at Dallas Seminary. So I learned. It took me 40 some years to figure this out, but. Don't let them take shortcuts. Make them learn by the ropes. Number 9, be cautious with critique, even if you're qualified. You ever hear the term sensitive artist? That's really, there's a reason that term exists, because many creative people tend to wear their feelings on their sleeves. And particularly your children, when they have worked on something and done a piece of art or written a song or written a story, whatever, and they bring it to you, they're not bringing it to you to say, okay, will you critique this now? What they're doing is they're bringing it to you because they want to hear dad and mom say, oh, that's awesome. I am so glad. This is good stuff. You might say, well, yeah, but it needs to be, it's not quite right. Yeah, I know. But understand that critique, if improperly given, can be crushing. And again, I have experienced that. I remember when I was in college at this point. My father was a trained commercial artist. And when I was in college, I started taking oil painting lessons. And they came to pick me up for Christmas or whatever, and I'd had a painting finished, and I very proudly brought my dad over to see it. And now, honestly, it was a pretty lousy painting. Okay, it was not all that well done. But, my dad looked at it, and then he just gave me a kind of a look that said, this is terrible. He didn't say anything. The look on his face was enough. And I didn't, well, then the next thing he said was, you want some pointers? And I said, no. That wounded me very deeply. And I was an adult at that point, okay? When you're working with a child, that wounding, is even more severe and often does not go away. I can remember many things over the years. I've never forgotten that moment. I've never forgotten it. And it's been forgiven. I don't hold a grudge against him, but all I'm saying is, don't hand out critique. Even if you're an artist, even if you're a writer, even if you're a musician, when your child brings you something that they have created, they're looking for approval, they're looking for encouragement. There will be plenty of time to critique. I, again, have to deal often with writers who bring me something to critique. And, at the adult level, again, particularly not family members, someone brings me something they want critiqued, I will ask this question before I ever say a word.